Alright, hello everybody. Today we're going to be going over the ketogenic diet, and instead of focusing on the controversy surrounding it, we're going to look more into the science behind it. So you may have seen some social media posts, maybe some memes, all centered around this keto diet. But what exactly is the ketogenic diet? So this is kind of a distribution of the macronutrients when you're on a ketogenic diet. Your diet will consist of 75% fat, 5% carb, and 20% protein. And then this is how it compares to a typical diet. In a typical American diet, you'll have 55% from carbs, 30% fat, and then 15% protein. And so this is kind of a guideline of what to eat. When you're on the keto diet, you want to have a lot of those high-fat foods. So you'll have your oils, your fish, your meats, your olive oils, avocado oils, butters and creams, nuts. And then what not to eat, you don't want to eat the higher carb foods like breads and pastas, higher starch vegetables like corn, beans, milk, and just other high carb foods. And so for this presentation, I'll be using this textbook called Understanding Nutrition by Ellie Whitney and Sharon Rolfs, and this was copyright 2016, so it is relatively updated. And to begin with, we're going to go over the general metabolic pathway. And so we'll start with our macronutrients. We have protein up here, carbohydrates, and fat. And then these are further broken down through catabolism. And we'll look at that. This is the catabolism of carbohydrates. You have glycogen stored in the body, and you can also have dietary sources of glucose like disaccharides. And so those are broken down into glucose through catabolism, which is specifically through a hydrolysis reaction, and then that further goes through the metabolic pathway to release energy. And so that's this right here, carbohydrates to glucose. And now we're going to look at fats. And so fats, you have triglycerides, which are composed of a glycerol backbone, and then fatty acids. And then those are further broken down in the metabolic pathway. And lastly, we'll look at our proteins over here, which are broken into amino acids through catabolism. And then that's again a hydrolysis reaction, and then the amino acids enter into the metabolic pathway to release energy. So we've gone over these first steps right here, and now we're going to see how all of those come into the rest of the metabolic pathway. So we'll start by looking at the glucose from the carbohydrates. So this is our glucose up here. The glucose is going to be converted into pyruvate via glycolysis, and we're not going to go too in depth with that. But all you need to know here is glucose gets converted to pyruvate, and then pyruvate gets converted to acetyl-CoA. And then acetyl-CoA goes on to the TCA cycle of the metabolic pathway. And then next, so we just went over the glucose to pyruvate through glycolysis. Now we're going to look at our fats over here. So we have our glycerol part of the triglyceride. Glycerol also enters into that glycolysis pathway, and that produces the pyruvate. But you see this arrow right here is reversible. So you can also get glucose from pyruvate through gluconeogenesis, and you can get glucose from glycerol also through gluconeogenesis. So that's one part of our fat. The other part we have are fatty acids. Fatty acids are converted to acetyl-CoA through beta oxidation. We'll look more at that on the next slide. But you'll notice that this arrow right here is not reversible. That means that once you get that acetyl-CoA, it cannot be converted into pyruvate and then into glucose. It's just acetyl-CoA. So those are our fats and our carbs. And then we have our proteins over here, our amino acids. You have two types of amino acids, glucogenic and ketogenic. So glucogenic amino acids, they can be used to produce pyruvate. And then again, this is reversible. They can then be used to produce glucose, or they can go on to produce acetyl-CoA. And our second type of amino acids, ketogenic, those are used to produce acetyl-CoA. And this is not reversible, so they continue on to the TCA cycle. Okay, so this is that beta oxidation we were talking about, the breakdown of fatty acids into acetyl-CoA. This is kind of a confusing diagram, but all you need to take away is that every time you break down a fatty acid, you lose 2 carbons and you gain a CoA to produce acetyl-CoA. So if you have a 16 carbon chain fatty acid, that would produce 8 acetyl-CoA molecules. All right, so we've gone over all of this top part, that's the pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, and now we're going to look at the TCA cycle down here. So again, this is a confusing diagram, but all you need to take away is that oxaloacetate combines with that acetyl-CoA we just mentioned, and then it makes citrate, and then you go through the cycle to re-synthesize the oxaloacetate. Another key takeaway, you have pyruvate up here, which can also be used to make the oxaloacetate. And then after you go through your TCA cycle, you get about 8 electrons, which are carried away by coenzymes to the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So this is our inner mitochondrial membrane. You have the movement of hydrogen ions into the outer mitochondrial membrane and the transferring of electrons from carrier to carrier. Eventually those hydrogen ions are going to come back into the inner mitochondrial membrane, and then you'll get the synthesis of ATP. And ATP is then transported out of this inner mitochondrial membrane into the cytoplasm of the cell to be used for energy. Okay, so how does all of this change when you're on a ketogenic diet? So remember, the key focus of a ketogenic diet is the fat intake. So you're going to get a lot more acetyl-CoA production because remember the beta oxidation, you get the production of acetyl-CoAs, and then when you have more fatty acids, you're going to get more acetyl-CoA production. Okay, and this is a look at what happens to those acetyl-CoAs. So when you have too many acetyl-CoAs, they're going to actually combine, and then you have acetyl-CoA here, acetyl-CoA here. They're going to combine to form ketone bodies, and you have 3 ketone bodies. Right here we have our acetoacetate, which can then produce acetone, another ketone body, or beta hydroxybutyrate, the 3rd ketone body. So that's really what happens with those excess acetyl-CoAs. So this diagram is a good representation of one of the main differences between the standard diet and a keto diet. You're going to have a lot less oxaloacetate, and that acetyl-CoA, like we just talked about, will form those ketones. So why do we have less oxaloacetate on a keto diet? That takes us back to this confusing diagram. Remember, pyruvate can produce oxaloacetate, and we need that pyruvate and we need that oxaloacetate to continue on with the TCA cycle to produce our ATP. So if you don't have enough pyruvate, you're not going to have enough oxaloacetate. And the reason we don't have enough pyruvate on the ketogenic diet is because we don't have this constant influx of glucose. And remember, carbohydrates get broken down to glucose. So when we don't have enough of those, we're not going to have as much pyruvate forming. You can still form pyruvate from the glycerol from the fatty acids and from the glucogenic amino acids, but it is not as efficient as getting glucose straight from a carbohydrate source. So that's one of the main differences in the metabolic pathway. Another change that happens when you go into ketosis, your body's going to lose a lot of fluids, and that's why people typically lose maybe 10 pounds in the first week. That's not going to be fat loss, it's actually water loss, because that glycogen that your body is storing is being broken down because you're not getting glucose from your diet. And so your body takes that glycogen, which has stored glucose molecules, and keeps breaking them down, and glycogen stores liquid. So you're going to be losing liquid, you're going to be losing vitamins, and you're going to be losing minerals. So that's kind of a negative side of the ketogenic diet, but a positive side, it can be used to help treat epilepsy. People have either complete ceasing of all of their seizures, or they can have about a 50% reduction in the occurrence of seizures. So I'll let you decide whether you want to do the keto diet or not, but you've kind of seen how the metabolic pathway changes. You have that acetyl-CoAs, they're going to go on to form the ketones, and you're not going to have as much pyruvate to feed into the citric acid cycle. So you're going to get less ATP production, it might be a little less efficient, but it can also help treat certain conditions like epilepsy.